Welcome everyone to the Unitarian Church of Los Alamos, whoever you are, wherever you are in your life's journey, whatever you believe, whatever you don't believe, whoever you love, you're welcome here. This is our Comparative Religion, Adult Religious Education class. I haven't done Comparative Religion in a while. I used to do one Comparative Religion class a month and one Bible class a month, and then it was too much. So when I started over after our COVID break, I've just been doing the Bible class. We just finished the first 5 books of the Bible, so now I'm ready to dive into comparative religion again. And as I did, I thought, what topics should I do that would be interesting and it would be, a good way to get back into it. And for better or worse, I picked atheism. Remember, this is part of, and then we'll talk about that in a minute because I know I just said something controversial. This is part of our larger comparative religion course. I try to put links to all the videos on this webpage. So if you go to this webpage, you should be able to find all the past classes. Someone asked me if I did a class on Buddhism. I think there's 3 or 4 of them there, and there's a whole bunch of classes on Hinduism, ancient Egyptian religion. Unfortunately, I recorded those a long time ago. They didn't record very well. I'm thinking of going back and re-recording some of these old classes. So I may be doing comparative religion classes on Egypt or whatever, again, just so I can get a good recording of them. But the links to the old classes should be there if you're interested. I apologize for the difficult URL, but it's free. Sites.google.com, view comparative religion. And I will also try to send that in a link to the church's newsletter. All right, so why study atheism as a comparative religion? What is it a religion at all? And if it isn't, why are we studying it? One of the famous statements along this regards is, if atheism is a religion, then not playing golf is a sport. I actually don't know who said that first. I've been trying to figure it out. I've seen several people say it, but I don't know who said it first. Sometimes it's golf, sometimes it's cricket. It just depends on who makes this quote. But again, I've heard this said many times, and they have a point. And so my point in teaching comparative atheism as comparative religion isn't to weigh in on this particular debate. I have other reasons for doing it, which I'll cover in just a second. The problem with this debate is that it's all about definitions. Depending on how I define religion, I can define atheism into and out of religion, and in that sense, it's not terribly interesting. But one way, and by the way, scholars of religion now universally agree that there is not a universal agreement about what constitutes religion, and by the way, that is the only thing they universally agree about. Defining religion is notoriously hard because there's always corner cases that just don't fit. Whatever definition you come up with, I will come up with something that doesn't match. Does religion have to do with belief in God? Well, then what about Confucianism? What about Confucianism? What about some forms of Buddhism? Does it have to do with ritual? Well, now Confucianism fits, but what about some low church groups that fervently believe in God but have almost no ritual? And again, whatever we define religion as, there are exceptions. Unitarian Universalists are one of the best exceptions because half of us believe in God, half of us don't. We don't care. Come hang out and we'll all have fun and sing songs and hold hands and talk about kumbaya. It's great. But again, is Unitarian Universalism a religion? And if we expand religion's definition enough to make it a religion, given that I know at least 3 of you are atheists sitting in my office, at least 3, then what happens and how do we treat atheism? Again, this is why my point here is just why the problem is hard. One of the best ways, though, to define religion was I found in the book by Stephen Prothero. It was originally from someone else. When I originally presented this, I gave the proper name. Now I can't remember where Stephen Prothero got it. But he says a good way to get at the heart of any religious movement is to discuss what they think the problem is, what they think the solution is, what they think the techniques are to achieve that solution, and maybe their exemplars. And once you do that, you quickly see why religions are similar and why they're different. All of them notice that something is wrong with the world, but they all diagnose the problem differently. And so again, this is not everything, right? If I say that Christians believe that the problem is sin, that doesn't explain everything, but it gets at the heart of the issue. If they think the solution is salvation through faith in Christ, that gets at the heart of the issue of what makes someone a Christian and how they differ from, say, someone who believes in Islam, where the problem might be pride and the solution might be very different. Submission is what Islam means, not the same as Christianity at all. If we put atheism on there, I think atheism in general does not qualify if atheism is just, I don't believe in God, and then you go about your life. There are a group of atheists for whom atheism has become an identity, and it is easier to put them in this category of a religion because you can do this same thing with them. What is the problem? Well, religion itself and superstition in general is the problem. Religion can't solve the world's problems because it is the problem. And the solution is to stop believing in God. Atheism and reason. Science, education, and reason are the way you achieve that. And you've got your four horsemen of the apocalypse, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Daniel Dennett, and they become our exemplars or patron saints. So in that sense, you can treat atheism as a religion. But it's important to note that for the vast majority of atheists who just don't believe in God and go about their life, this definition really would not fit. So my point is, I can define atheism into and out of religion by how I define religion, and I can also define it into and out of religion based on which atheist I'm speaking to, because they are a diverse group, just like every other group. Just as Christianity is diverse, so is atheism. But why is the debate about whether atheism is a religion so contentious? Well, because if you're an atheist, this is what the world looks like. Do you believe in God or superstition? That's the first question. If no, you're an atheist. If yes, you're a theist. And then if you're a theist, there's about 5 million different churches, beliefs you might belong to. One of these many, right? And so in this sense, atheism, as in terms of our epistemological priors, atheism has like a 50% chance of being right. Theism has a 50% chance of being right. And then theism is divided up into all these thousands of other religions. And then you have the evidence that there is no God that they believe. And out comes this very sound belief that atheism is the right thing to be. Theists care because they really want to divide the world up this way. They would really like atheism to be just one more religion, one among many, with no more probability of being right or wrong than any other. And of course, this makes theism much more likely than atheism, because you kind of sum up all the different religious groups. Now, again, I do not care about the debate of whether God exists or not. I don't care if you believe. I don't care if you don't believe. I want to encourage us to understand each other. And so I'm telling you what the debate is, what it's about, and then I'm going to say, we don't care. And the fact that I'm teaching atheism as a comparative religion course should not be seen as an endorsement of either of these approaches, right? It's just, that's not the issue that's interesting to me. What is interesting to me is how people produce truth, meaning in their lives. How do certain groups do it? How do Buddhists do it? How do Christians do it? How do Hindus do it? How do atheists do it? So that we can say, find out if there are any things we can learn that would benefit our own life based on how other groups do this. So if you're a theist, I encourage you to listen with something of an open mind to how atheists might construct truth and meaning. And if you're an atheist, when I teach these other courses about other religions like Buddhism, I'd love for you to say, well, what can I incorporate from Buddhism into my life and my practice that would make me a better atheist, a better person as an atheist, right? And that's what comparative religion is all about from my perspective. Of course, there are other reasons you could approach atheism as a religion in a comparative religion class. That's my reason from a moral perspective. What about from a scholastic or scholarly perspective? Well, from the perspective of anthropology, sociology, demography, atheism is one of the things people can answer on a survey. Like, what religion are you? I can be a Buddhist, a Christian. I can be a different type of Christian, a Mormon. I can be a Seventh-day Adventist. I can be Jehovah's Witness. I can be nothing in particular, or I can be an agnostic or an atheist. And so given that atheism is one of the options on the surveys that we use to understand religion in America and around the world, it allows us to ask interesting questions about atheism, like, how old are atheists compared to the general population? Are they younger, older? Are they richer, poorer, more educated, less educated? Are they more likely to be male or female? We can ask all sorts of very interesting questions based on the data we've gathered and about whether somebody answers the question, are you an atheist? What religion are you? With the answer, I am an atheist. The other thing to point out is that various courts in the USA have decided to treat atheism as a religion, at least in the sense that it is afforded the same First Amendment rights as other religious groups, which I think we all agree is a good idea to give them said rights, but that ruling made a bunch of atheists very mad because they didn't feel like they were religions, and it made a bunch of religious people who didn't want atheists to have those same rights very mad, so it made no one happy. But I think it's an interesting compromise. It's just treat it as a religion, which is what I'm going to do when it comes to answering these sorts of demographic questions. As in all things, I think it's very useful to not pretend you don't have biases. I am biased, and I think it's better for me to just tell you what my biases are up front, because that will help you understand why I take some of the approaches I maybe do with the topic. If I were to put Carrolism on the same chart, it would be something like intolerance and dogmatism are the source of the world's problems, ergo tolerance and a humble admission of uncertainty, something I struggle with because I'm an arrogant person sometimes, is the solution, a solution I desperately need. And the techniques can be education, dialogue, comparative religion classes like the one we're having now so we can understand each other. That's why I do these classes in the first place. And my exemplars might be someone like Jonathan Haidt and David Eagleman, who have a slightly different approach to some of these same ideas if you've read any of their work and compare them to someone like Sam Harris or Hitchens or Dawkins. This means that my approach is going to be different than some of the ones here. So, for example, Sam Harris makes a very good argument that belief leads to actions, right? And he's not wrong. As a Mormon, I had certain beliefs. And when I lost my Mormon belief, I hate the way I just said that, when I gained my non-Mormon belief, I became a more moral person. Why? Because my beliefs impacted my behavior and my ethics. And so the idea that beliefs have nothing to do with ethics is wrong. And so Harris would argue beliefs lead to ethics. That's why things like Islam are so dangerous. Because for him, the beliefs of Islam lead to the terrorism we see in Islam, and it's why Islam is a problem. And we shouldn't pretend that the religion has nothing to do with the behavior. He's probably not entirely wrong. But then he says things like nuclear weapons make it essential that we solve this problem before it's too late, the problem being these false beliefs of these people he wants to criticize, the Christians or particularly the Muslims. And then he makes the further claim that moderates give cover to the extremists. And moderate Islam, moderate Christianity isn't the solution. They just give cover to the extremists. They make religion look less authoritarian, less sexist, less problematic than it really is. So we need to not support moderates, we need to just attack religion in general. So criticizing Islam is extraordinary, in an intentionally inflammatory way, exposes its flaws, and this is essential, because if we don't do this, our society is going to end in a big nuclear fireball the day some suicide bomber also happens to have a nuclear weapon at his disposal. His fear is, I hope, something you can feel viscerally. There's a good reason to be afraid of this. This is why I disagree with him on a fundamental level. He may be correct that the beliefs and actions about and the severity of the threat, but the world is becoming more religious, not less. If we are objective, and I'll go through the numbers, it's one of the things I'm going to show, the world is actually becoming more religious. It's not becoming less religious. So that's the reality we have to deal with. And criticism of Islam isn't going to make it go away anytime soon. And if that's true, as a practical matter, as a purely practical matter, we have to find a way to live with the religious people around us and with Islam and with people who have religions that are different from ours. We have to learn to get along somehow. Therefore, promoting tolerance as a means of co-survival is essentially our only chance. And that means supporting moderate Muslims who are willing to live in tolerance with us, as opposed to extremists who are not. And so instead of criticizing Islam and all religion because we're going to make everyone non-religious, that's not going to happen, at least not anytime soon. So instead, I think we should be supporting moderates and being in dialogue with moderates and showing that we really can live together. I think if we don't do that, just like Sam Harris, I think we're all going to die in a big nuclear fireball. And so this is why my approach differs from him. Now, again, my goal here is to describe atheism as a group, but I want to tell you up front why my position is different than, is aligned with some atheists, like Sam Harris, like Jonathan Haidt or Sean Carroll. I agree with them and their position, and I maybe disagree with other groups like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, and it's because of this fundamental bias I have. So I think it's helpful to just tell you my biases up front, and then maybe we can, what I say will make some sense, because I don't claim to be perfectly objective. I try, but I can't be. All right, so in preparation for the class, I read 4 books. God is Not One by Stephen Prothero, which I've recommended all the time. For on most of my other religion classes, I've mentioned him. He has a chapter on atheism at the end. His chapter on atheism is relatively antagonistic, but he points his antagonism at the new atheists mostly, but he has this kind of antagonism to new atheism at least. But I also read Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion, Sam Harris, The Moral Landscape. I really want to read Sam Harris's The End of Faith, but I didn't get a chance. Maybe I'll do that before next month. And my favorite of these books is The Big Picture and the Grand Design by Sean Carroll. He has the right last name, of course, same as mine. But that's not why I liked it. And I really liked Stephen Hawking's book as well. And partly because, as a scientist, this is 2 people who approach this subject by teaching science instead of by kind of telling religious people they're stupid. And again, that approach obviously jives with my own biases as a scientist who believes that tolerance has to be the solution. All right, now I went through this class and I realized there is no way I'm going to finish, so I cut it in half. I really wanted to do this in one. It's not going to work. And part 2, unfortunately, is probably the most important, what I would consider the most interesting and the most important. And so, unfortunately, I'm not going to get to what I think is the most important part today. Today, I'm going to talk about demography and destiny. And what I mean by that is, what do the surveys tell us? What do they tell us about atheists? What do they tell us atheists are like? What can we learn about that? And are they growing, shrinking? Are we destined to live in a world where, everyone is non-religious in just a few generations, or are we going to live in an increasingly religious world in the next few generations? This is an important question and one that is open for discussion. So I'm going to show some objective evidence from survey data on these points. Then we get to dive into this: how do atheists make meaning in their life if they don't believe in God, which will be next month probably. This is not a book I read, but I love this introduction to it. At the dawn of the new atheist movement, the thinkers who became known as the Four Horsemen, the heralds of religion's unraveling, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, sat down over cocktails, and this was what they said in a viral YouTube video that now we have a transcript, along with some extra introductions, that has been made into a best-selling book. Hitchens, Dawkins, Harris, Dennett, the conversation that sparked the atheist revolution. The problem is religion isn't unraveling. And I'm not saying that because I want it to unravel or I don't want it to unravel. It's just because it's not. If we look at the number of unaffiliated people, it's going up. And it's projected by 2050, this is from Pew, that it will go from, I want to read this, 1.13 billion, and it should go up to 1.23 billion by 2050. So it's going up. Unfortunately, the fraction of the world that is unaffiliated is falling dramatically. And why is that? It's because Islam is growing. And as a fraction of the world population, Christianity is growing as a number of Christians, but as a fraction of the world's population, it's flat. Islam is growing, and Christianity and the unaffiliated are shrinking. Yeah. So this has to do with population growth. This is the number of people. And so here we have Christians, they're growing. Muslims, they're growing. The unaffiliated are growing slightly, but leveling off. And Hindus are growing, Buddhists are growing, etc. But
that's relative, though, to whatever we're projected to have 8 billion people.
Right.
Not like it is relative to actual physical person population.
Yeah, so
Yes,
so the whole population is growing, and so the religious population is growing too, along with everyone else. But in terms of the fraction of the world's population, the unaffiliated is shrinking. Yeah,
I'm curious. My understanding is that a lot of the really big population growth is going on in Africa.
Yep.
And other places too. Now, in Africa, what religion is growing the most?
Islam and Christianity. This is exactly in Southeast Asia. So I had a map that showed where the population growth was happening, and that's exactly the issue. So later I'll talk about unaffiliated in the US. It's growing, but the unaffiliated in the world population is shrinking as a fraction of the world's population. It's because everyone else is growing faster than we are, substantially faster. That's the issue. In fact, the estimated change in population size for Muslims, plus 73%, Christians, Hindus, Jews, folk religions, and the unaffiliated. So you see that the unaffiliated are growing 9%. The problem is Islam is growing 73%, and Christianity is growing 35%, and other religions are growing 6%. So this explains why the other graph looked the way it did, I guess. Yeah.
Is it possible to talk about categories such as nominally Christian and nominally Muslim?
Yes, it's much harder.
You know, meaning they profess it, but so what?
So Elroy's question was, what about is the depth of religion among the religious also falling? Are people praying less, going to church less? There is data on that, and I did not prepare that data, but I've looked at it, and it's fascinating. And it appears that some of the religious people are becoming, let me say this differently. Under moderate religions, they are becoming more moderate. Some of the high cost religions, like Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, they are not substantial, although Mormonism is a little, but you see it much lower rate. And so and then among those kind of moderate religions, there are also a lot of people are just becoming non-religious. And so what we really tend to see is something that I find troubling, and that's polarization. People are becoming deeply religious or deeply non-religious, and we're losing the middle moderate religious crowd in something that's dangerous. Yeah.
Is it true that church attendance is down overall
Yes.
in the United States?
Substantially, and almost all my data is from before COVID, and actually I really wish I had time to update all this with after COVID data, but a lot of things fell off a cliff, including attendance here after COVID, and that's something was felt among all religions. Attendance went way down. People discovered they had something better to do on their Sundays. Yeah.
If everyone has a cell phone, will that be something better to do?
I don't know what they do better, but if it's sitting there scrolling Facebook, then I worry for our population. Right? Okay. This one is interesting. The projective cumulative change due to religious switching. What I'm really getting at here is, why are these demographics the way they are? Now, Christianity is growing, don't get me wrong, but if we just look at where some of the Christians are going, some fraction of them are not Christian because they switched religions. And you'll notice in this case, the unaffiliated have the largest group. And so there's a large number of people leaving religion and joining the unaffiliated. The reason religion is still growing is because of demographic, the number of children they have, not this trend. But in terms of religious switching, the unaffiliated group is getting the most converts. By the way, unaffiliated means atheists, agnostics, and nothing in particular. So there's a lot of ways to be kind of religiously unaffiliated. We'll break that up into the three groups in a minute. This one is world. This is Pew's World Religious Forum projections. Yeah.
Where does it classify like the non-dogmatic Christians, like the big megachurches that don't necessarily follow a specific, well, I guess they do follow a specific dogma, but
Yeah.
it's not as easily categorized.
A non-denominational Christian is often a catch-all category for that group. They have a very almost a political ideology, as opposed to the sort of religious divides we saw in the past between Methodists and Baptists have largely gone away, and now there's kind of a political almost divide that divides the mainline Protestants from the non-denominational Protestants and the evangelical Protestants. Fertility, though, is the key. This was where I'm coming from. So even though Christians are losing a lot due to switching, they still have a higher fertility rate, and Muslims have a much higher fertility rate. So this is the real reason for some of these changes. And of course, these are projections. back in 2010, fertility rates around the world are falling, and so some of these projections will change in the future, and probably have changed already as we get more data. But the long-term projection looked something like this, where about around 2070 or so, Islam would become the world's largest religion. So let's summarize some global patterns quickly, and then we'll dive into atheism in more detail. The weird societies are growing less religious. What do I mean by weird societies? If you've heard me use that term before, Western, educated, industrial, rich, and demographic. And we, I think, don't realize that we are weird in terms of the fraction of the world's population. The weird societies are actually in the minority. And it's in weird societies where we see religion decline. But weird societies are having also fewer children. We have a lower fertility rate, and therefore the world is growing more religious. That's the summary. And there's a strong correlation between religious influence and how modern a society is in the sense of wealth, GDP, and democratic institutions, some of these other things. The U.S. being the outlier. We are very rich and also very religious, but in that sense, we are an outlier. Europe, for example, is going the other direction. So, what's happening in the U.S.? You'll notice evangelicals grew, but peaked around 1994, and they've been falling ever since, steadily. Mainline fell off a cliff. Black Protestants have been roughly stable. Other faiths have been stable. Jewish religion is falling a little bit, but mostly stable. And this big climb is no religion. So again, if you think about the book title, we started this whole diversion on Is Atheism Growing? That title makes no sense globally, but if we look at it in terms of maybe Europe and the U.S., maybe it has some weight. But I should point out this growing group of no religions, what we call the nones, they are not atheists. I'm going to differentiate them from atheists, and we'll look at some statistics on how they differ. But only 16% of them don't really believe. 16% think there's no way to find out. But 32% believe in some higher power. 4% believe in God sometimes. Believe with some doubts, 11%. And believe with no doubts, 19%. So 19 are committed theists. So just because they put no religion on a survey does not make them atheists. What they seem to be, and what we seem to be finding here, is a group of people who have lost faith in institutions. If you look across the survey data, they have lost faith in government institutions, educational institutions, media institutions, and they certainly don't go to church because they don't trust the churches, but that doesn't mean they don't believe. A lot of them read the scripture, read their scriptures every day in whatever religious group they happen to have as their scripture. A lot of them will pray daily, but like I said, these are not atheists. They're growing so quickly, and a lot of atheists will point at this data and say, look, atheism is growing in the United States. Look, atheism is, what is this, 25% of the population? The problem is only 16% of those don't believe. And even those don't believe with what degree of committedness. Another way to look at this data is this is from the GSS social survey. This is from Pew, but it's the same sort of idea. You see Christians almost all believe in God or some higher power, Jews, and then we have this religious nones. But the religious nones are not atheists because now we divide the religious nones out. These are the religiously unaffiliated here. But that religiously unaffiliated group has three subgroups: the atheists, the agnostics, and the nothing in particulars. And in their survey, the atheists, some of the atheists even will say that they believe in some sort of higher power. And so here we have atheists claiming, people who will check on the survey, I am an atheist, but then get to this question and say, I believe in a higher power. So what God is it that they don't believe in? The Judeo-Christian God. And that's enough to make them consider themselves an atheist, but it's not because there's some rational being who doesn't believe in God. It's because they don't believe in the Christian God. Of course, that's still a minority, but 18% is a rather large minority of atheists who claim to believe in some sort of higher power. So now if we go back to the GSS and the CCES surveys, again, this was Pew, this was GSS. If we go back to those surveys and we try to split them out this time, let's separate the nothing in particular from the atheists and the agnostics instead of just looking at unaffiliated, and this is what we see. Yeah.
What are those acronyms?
Nothing in particular is someone who puts on a survey, when asked what religion you are, they say nothing in particular. The General Social Survey and the Congressional Selection something. CCES is a political survey. These are names of different surveys, like Pew. And I don't, just like Pew, I can't tell you what Pew stands for, I can't remember, but the PEW survey. And this is the GSS and the CCS. The GSS is nice because it comes out every year. And they have consistently asked the same questions for years. It's a great way to track trends in the US. CCES is good because they ask a whole bunch of political questions, but they start with demographic questions, like what religion are you? So it lets us break down political trends by religion, which I'm going to do in a minute, and it's kind of fun. But this lets us get at, and by the way, depending on how you ask the question, you get a different fraction of the population who will claim to be nothing in particular, which is why we see the GSS and the CCES giving us different answers for how many nuns there are. But in the CCES, we also get the agnostics and the atheists broken out. And we'll see that they're around 8% of the population each, which gives us a healthy 16%. And they are growing, right? We went from under 5% all the way up to about 8%. But since 2018 to 2008 to 2018, it took a while. Atheism is growing, but it is not growing as fast as the nuns in general, and it is still a vanishingly small fraction of the population. This gets at your question. Well, no, this is a slightly different question. This isn't, are the religious growing less religious? The question here is, and in these details aren't important, I can read some of them, but really what it's measuring is how important is religion to you? And what we find is not important at all is growing, and this is specifically among the nuns. And so what we find is that, so remember I started out with this thing that I said the nuns are not atheists. A lot of them still believe in God, but they worship kind of at home on their own. It's the lack of trust in the church. The issue is when you stop going to church, because you've lacked trust in the church, maybe you still believe, but you stop going. When that happens, you also stop praying, because without the community's support, some of this begins to fall off. And so what we do discover is that the nuns over time are growing less religious. They think religion is less important. Let's see, what's this one? Seldom, never. How often do you pray? The number who pray never grows. How often do you attend religious service? A few times a year or less has grown. By the way, a lot of people say nothing in particular, but they go to church because maybe their spouse does. In fact, later we'll see atheists who go to church. We got a couple of them here, but a lot of them are going to church not because, like you, they want the community. A lot of them will go to church because their spouse goes to church and they have to. Their kids go to church or something like this. But I know several atheist Mormons who go to church because they have to. But again, the number of do you believe in God or a universal power or some universal spirit, I think is what it says. They've shrunk from 70% down to 61% between 2007 and 2014. This is from the Pew's Religious Landscape Survey, and they've done it twice. It is the biggest religious survey of different religious groups that I think has been put together in the U.S. ever, and it's been conducted twice. And we really need a third, but we get some interesting trends by looking at how this has changed over time. So that's interesting, right? The nuns, I just said they're still religious, but they're growing less religious. That's interesting. All of this is just to get at, is atheism growing or shrinking, right? And I've spent a lot of time kind of discussing that. But switching, demographics, children, the number of children you have, and religious switching are the big drivers on religious growth or shrinking. So here we have, again, this is a busy graph, but let's just look at the red numbers. These are the number of people who were raised evangelical and stayed evangelical, 73%. So evangelicalism is holding on to about 73% of its converts in this survey, right? They asked these people how, what religion were you raised in and what religion are you now? And 73% of those who said they were raised evangelical are still. Only 58% of those raised in a mainline tradition stayed mainline. 71% of black Protestants, 67% of Catholics, 82% of Jews, and then we get the nuns, 66%. So the nuns have fairly poor retention, which is an interesting kind of thought. And what seems to be happening is a lot of people are raised with no religion, which means when the missionaries knock on their door or when something bad happens, they haven't been taught, why not to believe. They just don't care, don't know. And they might end up Catholic, black Protestant. Or sorry, go the other way. This way. So 13% of the nuns, raised nuns, end up end up Jewish. I need to do this right to go make sure I'm going down the right thing here. No religion. Here we go. So these were raised no religion, but are now evangelical. 16%. I should be going across this way. 16% of those raised with no religion are now evangelical. 5% raised are now mainline. 1% are black Protestant. 5% Catholic. 1% Jewish. 5% some other faith, and 66% have stayed with no religion. So religious switching is one of these things. But this is what's interesting to me. Retention rates are falling among Protestants and Catholics, but they're actually growing among the no-religious. So I said they're about 66%, but you'll notice the trend is up. And so that makes sense. As more people in the population are not religious, then your chances of staying non-religious are higher because everyone around you is religious. We can get at that in a more fine-tuned way, but I don't think it's terribly important. Okay, so the non-religious are growing, they're getting more retention, and by the way, the atheists have a better retention rate than just the non-religious in general. So now let's differentiate, because, by the way, their parents taught their children not to believe in God and told them why. A lot of them will explain why religion is bad, and so their kids are less likely to switch to an evangelical church or something when they grow up. In the same way that an evangelical person might not become an atheist, because they've learned all the reasons why atheists are bad. Anyway, let's try to figure out now what, if we're going to look at those unaffiliated, how are they different? And what do they kind of look like? And so what we have here, again, is the Pew data for gender. This is the gender distribution of agnostic, atheists, and nothing in particular. And, of course, the general population is around 50%. And so what we find is some absurd number of atheists are men. So atheist is a predominantly male institution. There are female atheists, but there's not very many of them. It's very interesting. The other thing we discover is that they are racially white. The nuns are closer to 50-50 white, and then there's all these others, but the nuns are already more white than the general population, and the atheists and the agnostics both are much more likely to be white than the general population. So again, we find that atheists are male, they're white, and they are rich. So again, remember this weird thing? This is Western industrial, rich, democratic. Atheists tend to have a much higher income than the general population. And remember, the general population, these numbers here are 30,000, less than 30,000, 30,000 to 49, 50 to 99, and 100 plus. And so remember, the mean income in the U.S. used to be around 75 or something, roughly. And so more than 50% of atheists are substantially over the median age, or the median income. So they tend to be wealthy, and they also tend to be very educated. This is education attainment. Here we have high school or less, some college, postgraduate degrees. So both atheists and agnostics are very educated. And I don't know why. I've always wondered why the Pew data has them about the same. Every other survey I've ever seen has atheists more educated than agnostics, and agnostics more educated than the general population. But atheists tend to be highly educated. Marital status, I don't see terribly big trends here. But but they also tend to be slightly more single, it looks like, than the general population. And this is the truly bizarre one. This is belief in God among atheists, and I really want to know what happened when 8% of atheists in 2007 said they believe in God with absolute certainty. Again, when we look at the survey data, it's often very difficult to figure out why they're answering the way they are. Some people are answering nonsense because they're going quickly through the survey and they misclick. So there's always some small fraction that just don't make sense. But it's also possible. I've met people who've answered the survey this way, and I've asked them why. And again, their comment to me was, I do not believe in the biblical God of the Bible. I believe in some sort of deistic higher power, and so that makes me an atheist, because in our society, it's the God of the Bible that's the issue, and I don't believe in the God of the Bible, but I do believe in God. That could be what's happening in 2007. It's very difficult to decide. Again, my goal isn't to be prescriptive. If you're an atheist, this is what you have to believe. My goal is to look at the data and say, what did they choose? Why were there people who said they were atheists as their identity, but then said they believe in God? Again, but small fraction, 8%, and that fraction did go down by 2014. And I believe part of what's happening, well, one of the open questions is, why is the number of atheists increasing on the survey from about 3 to 4% to 8%? What happened? One answer is because there's just more people who've decided they don't believe in God. But another possible answer is that as more people have come out as none or as irreligious, the stigma surrounding claiming atheism has gone down, and so more people are willing to answer that way. Which doesn't quite explain why 8% of people would claim the title atheist but then say they believe in God. I'm not quite sure what that's all about. But either way, that number kind of went down. Yeah.
Do you remember the movie Men in Black?
Yes, I've seen Men in Black.
The very last scene with the giant being playing marbles with galaxies. that could kind of answer that there's something way beyond our understanding way up there.
But it's not the God of the Bible, so I'm an atheist. Yeah.
And it's becoming more culturally represented. There's other
Yeah.
descriptions of it. And if you think about, this is not quite 20 years ago in 2007, but with the idea of education and that kind of thing, there just are more possibilities
Right.
too. Whereas this is in opposition to a Judeo-Christian God.
Right.
Now we can say other ways.
And I think I've said in the past, whether there's a God is less interesting to me than the question of what is God like. Because Einstein and Stephen Hawking both use the term God all the time in their writing. But what do they mean? For them, God is this pantheist being, and they would consider themselves atheists, and yet they would use the term God. But their description of God is the pantheistic kind of sum of all that is. Harris and Dawkins especially, screams at them and says, you really need to stop doing this because you've confused so many theists who hang on you as examples of why they can believe. You're just confusing people. But from a perspective of comparative religion, I think that Dawkins also doesn't understand the pure variety of things people have called God in the past. And sort of as such, he misses the fact that the kind of pantheistic God of Einstein or of Stephen Hawking might not be totally out of place among, say, some groups of Hindus and other religions. So among the variety of religious beliefs, atheists tend to hunt the Judeo-Christian gods, right? But they can only hunt the gods they know about, and so the general concept of God has been much broader than that in human history. So yeah, Elroy, and then we get to dive into the really controversial stuff. We can talk about politics.
I see some shows about the universe and its history, and when I hear these shows, I'm often caught up in a funny question about whether the universe has been around forever or if it started at some point.
Yes.
And whenever I think of that, I'm perplexed by a problem within me that I'm somehow asking whether there is a creator, even though I haven't the foggiest idea what it would be that did the creating.
Yep.
But it's the world of science, causes the human mind to wonder about just those things.
Yeah, and so Elroy was talking about, if the universe had a beginning, does that mean it had a creator? These are very interesting questions, and the books I referenced spend a great deal of time on that subject. So, for example, both Stephen Hawking's book and Sean Carroll's book spent like 3 chapters on how the universe, what it means that the universe had a beginning. I remember Stephen Hawking has this this great example of a globe, and because we know from Einstein that time can bend, you can think of a time dimension like latitude on a globe, and it's not that there's a beginning; it's that there is nothing before. It's not like there was time and then God created the universe. It's like there was no time. It's like asking what came before the Big Bang is like asking what's north of the North Pole, because time itself bends onto a point where there's nothing before that. And then what does that mean? And it really kind of bends your mind. And what I loved about Sean Carroll's approach is instead of saying religious people are stupid, he says these are hard questions, and it really bends your mind. And no wonder so many people believe in God. Here's why I don't. But if you do, let's all get along. And I love that approach. And here, let me teach you about science. Let me explain why I don't believe in God. But we're all on the same side. And here's what I've learned about cosmology and the creation of the universe. And so, again, I'm biased, but this is why I loved his approach, because I felt like he educated instead of demeaned, and did a very good job of it. All right, politics. Let's get very controversial now, because politics always is. What we can say about atheists is they are the most politically active group of all the groups, by far. And what we're showing on the bottom here bottom axis is how many political acts did you engage in the last, I think it was last year, last 6 months or something. And atheists tended to do about 1.5 of those acts. And those acts, the list of options were things like, went to a political rally, gave money to a candidate, knocked on people's doors trying to talk them into voting for a certain candidate, something like this. And atheists were by far the most engaged political group. And you'll notice some of the reasons that Jews are next, and agnostics are next, and then comes Buddhists, and then we get the mainline Protestants, etc. This is how that's changed over time. Catholics and Protestants have actually fallen. That's interesting. There's noise here. They're trying to show the uncertainty in those error bars. The problem with those error bars is that uncertainty, that's the sample uncertainty. Whenever you deal with surveys, you should realize that there's also systematic uncertainty based on who they reached that has nothing to do with random sample size. And so you have to triple to quadruple all the error bars on every survey you've ever seen. And when you do that, you realize that atheists have basically been flat. Agnostics maybe are in decline, but are mostly flat. But the Catholics and Protestants have had a significant decline in their religious and political activity, which is interesting. We can also place the nuns on a political spectrum. One way to do that is to look at the entire sample, which is roughly to the right of moderate and to the Democratic side of independent. That's also interesting. So purple is the entire sample. Most people think of themselves as slightly conservative, but also vote. There's a group of people who think of themselves as slightly conservative, but vote Democrat because they see the Democrats as more moderate. So this is the entire sample. But then when we look at the nothing in particulars, they're still very close to the middle, but they move slightly to the left and down. They lean more Democratic and they vote more liberal. They vote more Democratic and they have an ideology that's more liberal. Agnostics are over here and atheists are over here. And each of these different dots is a different year in the survey. And again, I don't think what we see is dramatic change. You just have to kind of look at the sea of dots and find the middle because you're averaging out the noise here. So what we find is atheists are more liberal and they vote more Democratic as compared to the general survey results. And it would be fun to also put over here, evangelical Protestants who would be up here. But a really fun way to look at this is to ask yourself where you think you are in terms of middle of the road, liberal, very liberal, somewhat liberal, very conservative. Where are you? And almost everyone kind of says we're in the middle of the road. So do the nothing in particulars. We're in the middle of the road. But they're a little to the left of the middle of the road. And where do they think Republicans are? They think Republicans are conservative. They think Democrats are just somewhat liberal between. So the average member of the U.S. population and the average nun both think the Republican Party is more extreme than the Democratic Party, and they see themselves as being in the middle somewhere. Very interesting. But now let's do this for the atheists and the agnostics and watch what happens. I'm going to flip back and forth. This is the agnostics. So they see the Republican Party as even more conservative. The Democratic Party stays in about the same place, but they move themselves over towards the Democratic Party. So a lot of agnostics think they are more conservative than the Democratic Party, but they think the Republicans are even more extreme than the nuns did. But now this is the atheists. So a lot of atheists consider themselves more liberal than the Democratic Party, and they think the Democratic Party is more conservative than everyone else thinks it is. And they push Republicans way over to the right. So let's watch this as a movie. This is the nuns, agnostics, atheists. Let's do it again. Watch where they put the Republican Party. Nuns, agnostics, atheists. Now watch where they put themselves. Nuns, agnostics, atheists. Again, I think this is a very interesting way of kind of looking at the data, because it lets you ask questions of what do you think you are, what do you think everyone else is, and kind of why do you vote or side the way you do. And that translates into vote choice. Here we have the vote choice in, I believe this is, the average vote choice of what you voted in the last election, taken from surveys between 2008 and 2020. And so this is before the 2020 election. We have a survey in 2020, but all they're doing is asking them, who did you vote for in the last presidential election, whatever that was relative to when the survey was taken. They took all that data and compiled it together. You got each year actually separately. And you can see what the nothing in particulars did, what the agnostics did, and what the atheists did. Let's do that again. Nothings, agnostics, atheists. So what we're discovering about atheists is they're very liberal. They don't think the Democratic Party is liberal enough, and on average. But notice, there's a group of people here who are voting for Republicans. This is the results in 2020. We have white evangelicals who almost entirely voted for Trump. This is the vote in 2020, so now we actually have candidates on the name. These are Trump votes. Mormons, 30% voted for Biden, and 66% for Trump. And then we have the nothing in particulars, 65% voted for Biden. Agnostic, we have 80%, and atheist, 87%. And there's only one group, two, who voted for more Democratic than the atheists, and that is black Protestants and Muslims, who both voted more Republican or more Democrat. And that makes sense because Trump has been very anti-Islam in his rhetoric, and so they have migrated to the Democratic Party, which is a weird fit for them because all the social issues the Democratic Party supports, they don't support. So you can actually break out that vote by issue, and their issues don't align with the party they voted for. This is very interesting. So they're doing that because the other party is biased against them, not because of their ideological support. We can also break this out by prejudice. And again, very small numbers here, so I'm going to tell you what you're looking at. This is how warmly you feel about a different group. If you're a Democrat, this is how warmly you feel about different groups. So what they did is they asked people to rate groups based on how warmly they feel about them from some number scale. And so at the top means you feel warmly about it. Working class people, Democrats like working class people. They really don't like the Tea Party. Or Christian fundamentalists. But they don't particularly like atheists either. About 43% have warm feelings towards atheists. The rest have unfavorable. So Democrats don't have warm feelings. Atheists are right here. Christian, right, just barely above Christian fundamentalists. I want that to let that sink in for just a minute. Atheists are right here for independents, and they're right here for conservatives, and only the federal government and liberals are worse. So if you're a Republican, then the federal government and liberals are worse than atheists, but just barely. This reminds me of a story where a daughter came home to her parents and said, I no longer believe in God. And they said, oh, well, that's too bad. You really should believe in God. He said, don't I become an atheist? And they said, not believing in God is one thing, but being an atheist, how could you? Again, they're interpreting that as much as the way we do colloquially, right? It's not that atheists don't believe in God. It's that atheists don't believe in God and want to convince everyone else not to believe in God. And so having that label has stigma attached to it in a way that it otherwise wouldn't. So let's look at prejudice and discrimination. Same thing. What we have here is you have an unfavorable view, neither, or a favorable view of different groups. And so we have the Church of Scientology at the top, Satanism, Jehovah's Witnesses, the FLDS, those are the people who have like 5 wives and married 12-year-old girls, Mormon offshoots. And then we have Christian Scientists, Latter-day Saints are right here, Wiccans are right here, and atheists are right here.
Wait a minute, who is...
This is among the general population this time. They asked the general population how warmly you feel about different groups, and red means you have an unfavorable view, yellow means you don't have an opinion, and this green means a favorable opinion. So what we can say is 24% of the population has a favorable view of atheists, and I believe that says 38% have an unfavorable view, 39% don't have a view at all. And so what this does is this tells you kind of the relative view, but then this one tells you, what that means. You're at the bottom of the pack. What does that mean? Well, this is kind of, and these are also from different survey sources. So how you ask the question gets slightly different answers. So the point is we've asked this question several ways and we get kind of similar results. Atheists are right around the FLDS and Wiccans in terms of an unfavorable opinion. In fact, this breaks that out by your religious party. So Democrats have a more positive view, independents, and then Republicans have the most unfavorable view. But again, none of these are terribly high. What I think we're showing is that there is a stigma against being an atheist. Atheists are discriminated against. There's a stigma against being an atheist, probably one we're shielded from in Los Alamos, where almost everyone has a PhD and there's a large number of atheists around us. But out in the rest of the world, saying you're an atheist can get you into a lot of trouble, including someone who doesn't want their kids to marry you. This is marriage segregation. And the nothing in particulars would rather they didn't vote for someone or didn't marry someone who doesn't believe in God. But atheists are the other way. That if you believe in, if you're an atheist or an agnostic, 28% would be unhappy with their kid marrying a born-again Christian. But of course, if you are a white evangelical, 77% of their parents would be very unhappy if their immediate family member, child, whatever, married an atheist or someone who didn't believe in God. So again, lots of prejudice here. Which in God Is Not One, on his chapter on atheism, he talks about going to a conference. As a scholar of religion, this is part of his job. He went to a conference on atheism, and he heard people like Hitchens and Dawkins talk about, how stupid religious people are. And he said, I wouldn't go around the corner to listen to Hitchens and Dawkins rail if I didn't have to for my job. But Amanda Gullidge spoke. She was the only female at the conference, and she said that she'd never been out of her hometown. She'd never been on a plane. She'd never been on a subway, but she got on a plane and a subway to go to this atheist conference, and she gave a talk about how her children were not allowed to play with other people's children because they were atheists. And then she gave a lengthy talk about why her children are good people too. And Stephen Prothero then made the comment, again, my own bias shows too, but he made the comment, I would get on a plane, I would get on a subway to go hear Amanda Gullidge talk about why her kids are good kids too, even though they don't believe in God, whereas I wouldn't go around the block to hear Richard Dawkins or Hitchens degrade religions. This is what she said in that talk. She says, 3 cousins and 2... I went and looked for the talk, by the way, because of what he said about it, and I found a blurb, not the whole thing, but a short blurb, and it says, 3 cousins and 2 neighborhood friends were not allowed to play with my children because we do not attend church or accept Jesus as our Savior. Unbeknownst to me, my children approached both families and convinced the parents that it would be okay, then that religion would never be mentioned. In order for them to play, they had to promise not to try to deconvert the other person's kids, even though they will clearly try to convert them. My eldest son promised to tutor one child and to teach another to play chess, and eventually they were able to. So you see my bias about tolerance, but I want to point out that not just in preparing for this class, but over the years, Sam Harris, among other people, has challenged me, and probably in a good way. with my concept of tolerance. And he asks a very important question. This is the root of his criticism of Islam and other things. And he says, should we tolerate the intolerant? How do we create a society where I will believe what I believe, you believe what you believe, and we'll get along? That works as long as we're all willing to live together. But if only one side is willing to live together and the other side isn't, then what do we do? And he raises very interesting and challenging questions I don't think we should just completely ignore. Because this is a serious issue. What do we do when we say questions of belief and non-belief should be hashed out in the marketplace of ideas instead of with guns? But then we have a group of people who will shoot you if you print a cartoon of Muhammad. What do we do? And how do we create a world where we can get along, my position of tolerance, in a situation where one group is unwilling to tolerate? I think that problem is hard, and so I don't want to pretend I have an easy answer to it. My default is to promote tolerance on both sides so that group becomes smaller. His approach is to try to convince them to not be religious at all, so then they will be presumably more tolerant. I think his approach is doomed to fail, given demographic issues, whereas maybe mine has some hope. But I don't think we should just ignore the fact that if we're dealing with somebody who does start shooting at us, at some point we have to have the right to defend ourselves against those who are unwilling to live with us in peace. And what does that look like ethically, and how do we do that in a way that is morally upright and proper? And so I think Sam Harris, in that sense, he gets a lot of grief. A lot of people will call him racist. A lot of people will, and I've read both the attacks against him and his defense of his position. And I don't agree with most of what he says, but I find him challenging in a way that I think we should be listening to other people. That's the whole point, right? Listening to other people. I think it's worth listening to. So what are the conclusions? Globally, the percent of the religiously unaffiliated is shrinking. But in the U.S., it is growing. The nuns are not atheists, but the nuns are growing more. But the atheists are also growing in the U.S., just more slowly, and the nuns are becoming less religious over time. We know that now atheists tend to be male, white, educated, rich, liberal, and stigmatized. And one of the problems with whenever you do demographics with surveys is overgeneralization. And overgeneralization is what bias and racism and all these other things are based on, right? And so the fact that atheists tend to be male does not mean every atheist is a male. We saw several there was a sizable chunk of female atheists, just more of them were male than otherwise. And so it's important to, I think, look at these wider trends, but it's also important to recognize they're not universal. So one of the things atheist groups might want to consider is how do they attract more females into their organization if they want to appeal to a wider range of peoples. So again, knowing these trends is useful both for them and for us as we understand what's going on. So where do I want to go with this? I've always aimed at my comparative religion classes to try to understand how different groups construct morality and meaning from life so that we can enrich our own sense of morality and meaning and learn from them, which is what I just talked about, how Sam Harris challenged me. How those who don't believe in God or an afterlife or higher power go about that seems incredibly important, whether or not we agree with them. And one of the reasons it's incredibly important is I've argued in my comparative religion classes that religion is a biologically kind of psychologically instantiated thing, that there are elements of human psychology that make us do some of these religious things, make us believe things that maybe aren't true, maybe are true, but they also make us gather in groups, sing songs, become tribal about our identity as a religious group. A lot of these, and answer questions with myths and stories, that's inherently human. And so if somebody says, I no longer believe in God or the supernatural, well, then how do they go about constructing those things? So I wanted to tell you a little bit about what atheists are as a group, and then I wanted to dive into this. And I wanted to get to this because it is the most important part. But I felt like I had so much in the other thing, I just wouldn't have time to do it justice. So I split it in half, and this is what we're going to talk about next time. We're going to talk about David Hume, René Descartes, and the depth of the problem of discovering morality and meaning and truth without God. And then we'll talk about how atheists do it. And again, when I talk about the depth of the problem, that doesn't mean I think atheists are wrong or right, either one. It just means it's not trivial. For most of human history, God has been involved in how we define truth, morality, meaning. And so to give that up is a radical departure from what we've seen in human history in the past. And I found, interestingly enough, that the way Sean Carroll does that, and Sam Harris and Sean Carroll are the two who address it most directly, but Sean Carroll's attempt to do that is very much in line with my own, and was in line with my own before I lost some of my religious faith. And so I think we can all learn something from them, whether we agree with them or not. And I hope to show you kind of what I learned from them, what I found most interesting about how they constructed their morality next time. So this is what's coming up. Next time I'll do Atheism Part 2. Then we need to finish some of the Eastern religions. We never did Confucianism and Taoism. And I wanted to do those before we did Zen Buddhism. So we've done Buddhism, but we left Zen off because Zen was influenced by Confucianism and Taoism as it moved into China and Japan. So I wanted to do Confucianism and Taoism and then finish up Buddhism with Zen. We started that in 2019 before we all got sent home and locked down. So I hope to return to that and finish Buddhism, get ourselves Confucianism, Taoism under our belt, and then maybe, depending on what people want, we'll return to the Bible. We finished the Law of Moses, we might start doing Joshua, Judges, or Ruth, again, depending on what people are interested in, or we'll pick another comparative religion topic, and I'm willing to let you give lists of what you most want to hear about. And so I'll see you next week. I hope that what we've shared has helped you in your own search for truth and meaning, and I'll see you again next month. Not next week, next month. Thanks for coming.